Welcome to Tag TV News and Views Bulletin. Today I am Halima Sadia. Today my conversation is going to be a former Minister of Immigration, Mr. Chris Alexander, who is very well reputed for his honesty and outstanding work while he was on the office, and now he is not, but he is a very big contributor. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. Great to be with you.
As we are talking about the Conservative Party, and we are going to talk about their policies, and since Toronto Star has a recent story of citizenship rate which has gone down as per the policies of Stephen Harper, which had been very strict. So what is your take on them?
Well, first, the headline in the Toronto Star was predictable, blaming us for what they claim is a setback. The reality is a bit different. To move from 86% to 84% roughly of immigrants, permanent residents who become citizens is not a big decline. In fact, we are still far and away the country in the world with the strongest immigration, but also the strongest trend line of immigrants, permanent residents choosing to take the final step and having the opportunity to become citizens. There's no other country that comes close to 80%. Even Australia and the European countries that have immigration don't do that. Moreover, I think this number will need more study as the years go by, because in recent years, the last years of our government, now the first years of this Liberal government, immigration has gone up. So the sample size in recent years is larger. That can dilute the numbers for the purposes of a study like this. The real question is, what do we want citizenship to be in Canada? What do we expect from newcomers so that we continue to have a country where people feel a sense of belonging to one society, to one set of national institutions? And what are we going to ask of newcomers so that we can be quite confident that they will succeed? Citizenship isn't there just to be a barrier. It is there because it's a set of requirements that Canadians think you need to meet to benefit fully from being a part of this country. And yes, it's language, English, French, or both, as well as other languages people speak, but the common languages are those two. It is definitely education, and that's reflected in the knowledge test, partly the language test as well. It's residency, the commitment to live in Canada, not just to have the passport and live elsewhere, but to actually live and contribute here, in most cases with your family. And then it's, perhaps most importantly, the commitment to live under our laws. You know, a permanent resident who breaks the law, who acquires a criminal record, is not eligible to become a citizen. But what does that involve? You know, what kinds of criminal backgrounds are acceptable in the immigration process, in the citizenship process? These are things that we should discuss, because there are real differences between Conservatives and Liberals on these issues. And I think Canadians, when they get the chance to hear the arguments fully, are pretty clear about where they stand.
So I was coming to the point that you had been a former minister for immigration, and you see as a Conservative different policies, and you see how do you see the Liberals' policies, and how would you compare them, and what are your findings as an outsider right now to observe the situation?
Well, first, there's no need for panic. I think our citizenship program is strong. Most of the reforms that we brought in for immigration and citizenship are still intact. We've made the system faster, more efficient. We improved the integrity. It's not possible to cheat the system the way quite a few people did in the past, to pretend you're living here when you're not actually here. There are safeguards. And that was reflected in 2014 when we had the largest number of people in Canadian history become new citizens, because we had a big backlog. And we started with the new legislation to have the tools to deal with the backlog. 260,000, over 250,000 people became citizens in 1 year. And that faster pace of processing is still working. I think, though, you can talk about 3 stages in the recent history of citizenship and immigration, citizenship in Canada. Before 2010, where we really had a legacy that came mostly from Liberal governments over previous decades, we had a lot of people becoming citizens, but we also had a lot of fraud and abuse. A lot of citizens of convenience, people who paid a consultant or a lawyer to pretend they were here, they weren't really here. Quite a few people who managed to become citizens even though they had criminal records because the checks weren't done as thoroughly as they should have done. We started to address, and then a backlog, a huge and growing backlog, longer waiting times, which is frustrating for people because if you've met the requirements for citizenship, which the vast majority of newcomers do, you shouldn't have to wait. You pay the money, you should get a result. All of those problems were very pronounced before 2010. We had a long era, 5 years of reform, both under Jason Kenney and in my time as minister. At the end of that time, we had very clear rules, much stronger integrity. We were on our way to having 0 backlog. And then since the new government came in, I think what we've seen is some of those reforms are being reversed. Instead of a 4-year requirement for residency, it's 3. Instead of full commitment to following the rule of law and to revoking the citizenship of people who were convicted of terrorism, for example, we're now saying, no problem if you've been a terrorist, you keep your citizenship. That represents a step back, in my view. That cheapens our citizenship. We want citizenship to have integrity, to have value, because we know Canada has value. And we want to send a clear message to everyone who comes to this country. We want you here, but on the basis of the same rules that we all live by. And some of that is being rolled back. I mean, one small example is the residency requirement. We had raised it from 3 years to 4. There's only one other large immigration country that has a 4-year requirement. All the others have more than that. That's Australia. With 3 years, we are the only country in the world with such a short period of adaptation, integration, learning before a newcomer becomes eligible for citizenship. I personally think that's a mistake and that it devalues a citizenship that we all otherwise celebrate.
So now we will come to the refugee point, where what do you think the assimilation and the refugee status claimant, what is your point?
Well, I think our refugee system has been incredibly successful on the whole. If you look at citizenship, Canadian refugees are among the highest, have among the highest rates of naturalization because they see becoming a Canadian as an opportunity. It represents a huge contrast to the conflict situation or the poverty or the persecution that they were fleeing in their home countries, in their countries of origin. Moreover, refugees have an additional motivation that economic migrants don't always have. They have escaped with their lives. They are grateful on another level. You know, an economic migrant probably had an opportunity at home. We hope they have a better opportunity here. A refugee really didn't have an opportunity at all. And when they come to Canada, they have wonderful opportunities and a lot of support. Increasingly, our immigration program is focused on providing supports, removing the barriers that refugees face, because they tend to be the ones who come without good English or French, without a completed education because it was interrupted. So I think it's a great story. And I actually think Canada, at a time when very few countries are willingly accepting, resettling refugees, at a time when the United States is showing a complete lack of leadership on these issues, I think it's a time for us to show even more leadership. And I'm disappointed that the government is quietly scaling back our commitment to resettle Syrian refugees. We had a big year in 2016, fewer in 2017, even fewer this year. And I think that's a mistake. We should be standing up and being counted as the leaders on refugee resettlement when others refuse to lead.
So what do you think the system and the methodology of assimilation and refugee integration needed? How do you view that? I mean, what are the requirements and how far do you see this government is doing for?
So I think for the most part they're doing the same things we were doing on a slightly larger scale because of the crisis the world is facing, and I support these approaches. There's some differences of emphasis. In the first 2 years of this Liberal government, they tended to emphasize government-assisted refugees who come, yes, with government support, but without a network of Canadians to support them. Privately sponsored refugees have that network, and I'm pleased to see more of an emphasis this year in 2018 on the private sponsors again, because we know that the results of private sponsorship are better, objectively better. Research shows that. So that's one difference of emphasis which I would like to see corrected, and the trend this year is a bit better. But how do we succeed in integrating refugees, for the most part, very successfully? It's these three things. It's the networks of support, private sponsors, communities, church groups, mosque groups, synagogues, mayor's offices, town councils, companies, groups of companies. Every community has at least one group, and in the case of the GTA, hundreds of groups that are engaged in this. Secondly, it's language. You have to give people the opportunity to have this basic tool for success, for continuing their education, for entering the job market, English, French, and we have the capacity to teach. We do it well, and most refugees avail themselves of that opportunity. Thirdly, it's orienting people in the job market, helping them find a first job, sometimes a very humble job, washing dishes, working in Tim Hortons. We all started that way in one way or another. It can be quite menial, but at least you have an income. At least you have the pride that goes with supporting yourself and your family. And then in most cases, refugees move forward very quickly to improve their skills or find the job that they really want. In the first instance, it's important just to have something, anything. But down the road, if they continue to get the support that Canada is quite good at offering, then they find a career that reflects their potential and their talent. And that's a very exciting thing. I mean, look at Canada's business leaders today. Huge number of billionaires, people who've started the biggest companies in Canada, came as refugees. Some from Europe after the war, some from Asia, Hong Kong, etc., some from the Middle East. But they arrived, perhaps not with much education, certainly not with much money, but with this profound desire, drive to want to succeed, and that has paid off for them. I'm sure the same will be the case for the refugees that are coming today. That's why I think we should have a lot of refugees. And I'm not talking about irregular, random migration. I'm talking about a government policy to safely and successfully resettle refugees. It should be at least 10% of our annual immigration levels, perhaps rising to 15%. The asylum system that we have, people coming across the border from the United States, is also important. But I think our real mission in the world today is not to, first and foremost, serve people who come here with a visa and then decide to make a refugee claim. Those people have opportunities already. our unique opportunity is to help refugees in the camps where they've been languishing for years, for 5 or 10 years, in Africa or in and around Syria. We have a world where about 70 million people have been displaced. It's more than at any time since the Second World War. We're not going to resettle them all. We need to help them go home. We need to help them get education in refugee camps. But some deserve the opportunity to come to Canada, as previous generations of refugees have done.
So it's basically the investment to bring out the contributor and not the people who are going to be burdened on.
Absolutely. And welcoming refugees is not just a job for the government. It's for all society. Yeah. Anyone with a large business should have a few refugees among their employees. Most in the Toronto area do. Any faith group or community group that cares about these issues should sponsor a refugee. It works much better when we have that grassroots community support in addition to the role that the government plays.
So multiculturalism and immigration, they go hand in hand, do they?
Absolutely. I mean, by definition, they do, because our immigration programs are for the whole world. We do not select, prejudge, screen on the basis of what country people are from, what their ethnic background is, what their religion is, what their sexual orientation. We have a non-discriminatory immigration program, and we are probably the only country in the world to have that on a large scale. Even the United States discriminates now. There are 9 countries, maybe it's 8 now, that are ineligible for immigration to the United States, even to visit the United States. It's incomprehensible, and really a step backwards for the United States, which we have not even contemplated for a second. So by having large-scale immigration that has support in Canada, we are building a society that reflects, that has roots around the world. And this is healthy because it's one planet. We want to have connections with every continent and every country. Our trade, our economy, our investment depends on that. But let's not get obsessed with the idea of multiculturalism and diversity and difference. While we celebrate all of those things in Canada, and the restaurants we can go to, and the friends we can have, and the richness of our society, there is also a unity. We live together in Canada. We contribute to the same institutions. We are building the same country. We are protecting the same environment. And so our multiculturalism, our diversity, is a success in the context of Canadian unity, which in many respects has never been stronger. We do not have a strong and active separatist movement. We do not have terrorism or political violence within our borders on any scale. We have strong laws against hate speech, not always enforced, but enforced more than in many other parts of the world. We have relatively civilized debate and an inclusive society where everyone's voice is valued. We have to keep working on it. Racism does exist. Anti-Semitism does exist. There are people in Canada who are hostile to Islam, just hostile to the religion. And that is hard to take, hard to understand. And in some, when it turns into hate speech and violence, it needs to be stopped, and stopped by all of us. But this is the price of freedom. There are people who will go too far sometimes in a free and democratic society. But if we uphold the freedoms we have, if we continue to strengthen the unity that we have in caring about this country altogether, on the basis of diversity, multiculturalism, and a deepening understanding of the whole world, not a Eurocentric view, not a view centered only on North America, not a view centered on only a couple of countries in Asia, but a view that is truly global, we can be the country of the future. That's what I think Canada is, and should continue to be if we live up to our potential.
So basically, it is a deep understanding of the reality and the context we are living in is very important. Diversity has its points, but common places and unity is very much needed. But again, critics are saying that because we are having so many debates and all that, ghettoization is growing. So what is your opinion? How come we can take charge and control of it, because it's going tremendously high?
Yeah. I mean, I debate this with my friends and in my family all the time. I don't see the same kind of divisions, hermetically sealed communities in Canada that I see in parts of the United States still, in urban America, and certainly in parts of Europe now, where communities are, there may not be a physical wall, but there is a societal de facto division that people do not cross, even in parts of London, certainly in other cities in the UK and in continental Europe. And that is worrisome. If people are saying, don't go there because those are not our people, you know, it's not safe for you there. We don't want that to happen here, and I don't see it happening here in that respect. At the same time, we have our challenges. We have large-scale immigration happening. We have people who rightly want to be surrounded by people they're familiar with. And so we need to have the flexibility and the mobility in our society that builds bridges. You know, there aren't neighborhoods in the GTA that have belonged to one community for 3 or 4 generations. Things here change. You know, like my friends' neighborhoods in downtown Toronto, which are very diverse now, which may have a lot of Tibetans in them. A little while ago, they were full of Jamaicans. And before that, they were full of Polish immigrants. And before that, they were full of Jewish immigrants. Things change because people succeed, move elsewhere, buy a bigger house, and that mobility has been a reality. We want to keep it that way. That means we need a strong economy. We need markets that work, housing markets that work. We need good zoning. We need good policing and law enforcement so that no part of any city becomes criminalized more than the whole urban area that we're proud to call home. But then we also all have a role to play in preventing this kind of phenomenon, ghettoization or over-concentration of one group in one area from happening. We need to build bridges. And I think the most exciting thing that is happening in Toronto, Canada today, is what's happening between groups. You know, groups of young Jamaicans who are partnering with young Somali children of refugees or refugees themselves. Different generations of European immigrants meeting new generations of new waves of Asian immigrants who have the same profession or are working in the same sector. Faith groups that are crossing boundaries that used to be very, very inviolate in the past, and partnering with each other in different ways, sharing a building or sharing an initiative or sponsoring a refugee together. When you look, I think, fully at the situation, you see that happening more or less everywhere. It's very hard in a city like Toronto or in Canada to wall yourself off from, you know, just inside your family or inside your community for very long. Some people do it, yes, but I think most people go beyond and are building those bridges. The job market the education system, and our democratic life in this country, political life, bring people together in new ways every day. And that's the most exciting thing about being here. Go to a Toronto restaurant. It may be Ethiopian food, but you won't find many Ethiopian people eating there. Similarly, I had brunch at an Iranian place recently. I don't think there was anyone there whose background was in Iran. And yet everyone's delighted to have a brunch that we could have been eating in Tehran. That's the beauty of a city like this. It's about crossing those boundaries every day and enjoying a new culture, if you wish, every day without having to get on an airplane.
So every right comes with the responsibility. That's why we need to interact and learn, because the system has reached to the point where it has so much to offer.
It has, and we will all succeed and we will overcome whatever challenges there are if we keep one very important driver of personal satisfaction and success in life in mind, and that is curiosity. Why would you not be curious about what's going on in that church, or what is being said at Juma prayers in this mosque, or why is this march happening on this day? What are they protesting? What are they celebrating? I mean, this is fascinating. And when you start to ask these questions and get the answers that your neighbors can give you, your friends and neighbors can give you, life becomes much, much richer. And we realize we really are living in a global village. We really do have just one planet. We really do depend on each other through trade, certainly for peace and security. And this kind of dialogue across language barriers, barriers of ethnic origin, culture, is something that involves all of us. And it's a lifetime's work to sort of understand, have an appreciation beyond the very superficial of all the major communities that make up the GTA. But it's a wonderful challenge to set for oneself. And if you keep your curiosity strong, this appetite for new tastes, new ideas, new answers to questions feeds itself.
Culture is usually, I always say that the context of the culture is through the geography and the weather and all that. And if we are not curious, if we are not going to be ready to exchange that, how will we know that? So it can be an endless talk. Thank you very much for being with me today. And thank you all for watching our show today, our bulletin today, our little talk with Chris Alexander.